guys. So today I'm going to talk about something that's very near and dear to all of our hearts, and that is around solving problems. And I'm going to talk through a few kind of myths and truths. And as you think about actually what's a myth versus what's a truth, the difference between those things is what's kind of widely accepted, what are widely understood ways of kind of going about things. And I think that's part of the reason why you're here today, is you're here to hear about people that are solving problems in new and unique ways. And the reason why I want to talk about myths is because in debunking those myths and in thinking about problems in different ways, that's the way you actually get to sort of the secret sauce of product development. And there is something sort of atypical about that, right? It's not just accepting something, and it's not just going with what solution actually ends up coming about as part of solving a problem. It's actually about thinking about this sort of atypical nature of problems and the different ways about going about solving those problems. So I'm going to talk to three today. And I've, I suppose, been on a fairly atypical journey myself in my life and in my career. I grew up in the United States. You probably can't tell that from my accent, or maybe you can with certain words. I then spent some time when I was younger in Australia. I then started my European journey, or European life, in France. And I've been in Ireland for the last 6 years. So, if you just think about those different contexts and the way that I've sort of lived my life and my career, it definitely throws up different ways of thinking. Next, then, I started in art. So I did my degree in art. I was in the gallery space, so I was doing lots of paintings and lots of drawings. And I ended up in business, crunching a lot of numbers and thinking about products in different ways. And then I also started my product development journey in beer. Beer was really fun. I enjoyed that a lot, but I actually like software a little bit better, which hopefully you'll see today. And to talk about Cartrawler, which is the name of the company, a lot of you probably actually haven't heard of Cartrawler because it, like me, is a little bit atypical. It's not necessarily a commonly understood problem because we're a little bit of a middleman in the software space. So the way that we work is we have connections built with lots of different car rental companies around the world. So we have about 1,600 different connectors built with all of these different suppliers or car hire companies around the world. And then we work with lots of big partners in the travel space to actually provide and plug in our software into their systems, right? So it's quite a different way of approaching a product, and that in its own right means different things and different ways of solving problems. So as I said, I'm going to talk about three myths that I feel have definitely been debunked, and things that are either commonly accepted in your spaces and look a little bit different for us and may also look different for you. So the first one is that it's hard. We often, I suppose, think about solving product problems as being something that's quite hard. And while in some ways you could agree with this statement, in other ways I'd say that it is a bit different. Second is that it's just about the user, right? Focusing on your end user and actually understanding what your end user wants is absolutely mission critical to how you develop your product, but it's not just about that user. And the third is going after kind of those big bang moments. We all want a product that's sleek and sexy and something that's different and something that's really exciting to kind of look at. But ultimately, is it really, really, really about the big bang, or is it about an iterative process to get there? Or are there little things that you can do to touch up the product to make it better? So I'm going to talk through three examples, very tangible UIs that hopefully, as we go through some of these slides, you can see some of the UIs that I'm referring to. But the first one is a map display at the back that I'm going to call Downtown. And that map display is solving for a cohort of our users that don't rent cars at airports. So typically, if you think about how you rent a car, you usually rent it after your holidays, you pick it up at the airport, and then you drive it around while you're on your holidays. So this cohort of user goes, you know what, I'm going to my hotel, I'm going to rent my car while I'm in the city center, and so actually location is a lot more important to me than maybe some other things that you typically think of. We then have insurance. when you're renting a very high value asset like a car that's worth around 30,000 euros, you want to be insured. You don't want to damage that car. You don't want to pay things towards that. So insurance is a really important part of our funnel and our product. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about filtering as well, because I just love filtering. I think it's a really interesting way to think about how our users are comparing the content that they're coming across and what they're selecting. So as I said, downtown is about location, and we know that 40% of our users actually cite location as being the primary driver. Like, this is the primary reason why they're actually going after the car rental in the city center, and this is what's going to drive their decision as to which car that they actually select. And then you go, okay, well, that's interesting. So what, right? So people want location, so we put a map display on there. That's great. We're trying to cater towards that interest. We're trying to build software products that work in that vein. And the so what of this is actually, here's our airport display. So when you pick up a car from an airport, or when you're selecting a car from an airport, you see this list kind of view, right? And you're going, well, that's quite different from a map. Like, how people interact with that is very different to how people are interacting with a map. And the so what of this is going, well, actually, when you look at that display, it converts at 50% less. And that's something that doesn't quite add up, because actually there could be people that are picking up cars at airports, and there could be people that are picking up cars at city center. They could be the same user, and yet we're converting at 50% less. And so you're going, well, what's the story with that? Like, how does that work? So the second one I mentioned was around filtering and how we actually make it easier for our users to compare cars. So as you can see there, this is a list of the names of cars, a lot of car jargon in there, economy, compact, mini, but very commonly accepted and understood terms in a car rental space. And in Compare, we looked at some kind of interesting stats with our product insights team around actually how many people are looking at these sites and selecting cars, and how are they behaving on the site when they select those cars. And what you can see from these numbers here is that they're spending a lot less time on mobile, which is the display I just showed you, and they're selecting a lot more cars. So they're spending less time on that stage of selecting a car, and they're selecting a lot more. So it means that actually it's really kind of hard for them to sort of see. Whereas on a desktop, they spend a heck of a lot of time, and they don't select many cars. And you're going, okay, that's kind of interesting, right? But the so what of that is actually, when you look at our desktop car size filter, and you look at our mobile car size filter, you go, well, there's kind of a difference there in terms of user experience, in terms of people, how people are selecting those sizes of those cars, and there's a bit more context there. Does that mean something? And between that 10.7% conversion rate and that 3.49% conversion rate, right, that's a huge difference. And we also know that our users use desktop and mobile to book our cars, and it is very much the same user. So why is there that 67% difference between those two displays? And then finally, insurance. So as I said, insurance is an important component part of our funnel and how people rent cars, how people think about renting cars. And the reason for that is, as I said, is because it's a high value asset. It's something that you're going to be driving around of a car hire company, and it's something that you get upsold very aggressively at the desk, if any of you have gone through this experience before. And so what we offer is exactly that. We go, right, not to worry, you can book this as part of your booking, and it's something that's important to you as a user as you think about car rental. And what we found was that 53% of our users didn't understand the differences between these two insurance products. And so much so that they actually called out the naming convention that we have for those two different insurance products. So they said, yeah, I don't understand the difference between basic and premium. And that's kind of interesting, because you're going, okay, well, they understand what the products are because they're calling it by their names, but they actually don't understand the differences between those two things. And that's over half of our user base, right? That's a problem, right? And the so what of that component is that we actually saw conversion erode at about 10%. So it's a really important problem for us to solve, meaning that this is such an important part of the journey and our funnel. So if we go back to those three myths, and we talk about the first one, it being hard, product development being hard, solving problems being hard. What I'd urge you to think about is this kind of overwhelming feeling that we all have in a world of lots of different opportunities. Probably 50+ different ways of solving some of those problems I spoke to, lots of different ways of thinking about those problems, and then I'm lucky to work in a company that has lots of opportunities to go after, right? So we've got loads of different ways in which we could be approaching the product. And that's really exciting. But there's something about that kind of overwhelming feeling that's important to sort of harness in a way, right? And the way I liken it is to this kind of screen, right? So when you walk into a grocery store and you're hungry and you have lots of different ambitions, lots of different opportunities you could be going after, or you're just genuinely hungry, ultimately you end up picking up lots of things you don't need, lots of things you don't want to eat, lots of things that ultimately are probably not even going to satisfy that hunger. And so the point here is really, it's not so much about it being overwhelming, it's about creating the right level of focus and knowing what you want when you go in. And so to bring it back to those 3 examples, the first being downtown, I'm going to talk about time to focus, time to break down the concept of an idea, and then the time to actually develop that particular feature, right? And when you look at that time to focus and when you look at the time to break down the idea or concept, you actually see that as these 3 features come together, there are different time differentials in that, right? And that time to focus is a very important part of what it actually means to realize a feature, right? So if people aren't focused on it, no matter what intel you have, no matter what kind of understanding you have, you ultimately actually don't even get to the problem in the first place. You don't even get to breaking it down. And so if you think about those 2 different component parts of what it means to bring about a feature, it really is much more about how much we know and the buy-in associated with that feature, right? So if you know a lot about it and you have high buy-in, it's actually going to get to market a lot faster. So if you actually plot those out on the graph and you think about where they fall in terms of how quickly they're getting to market, the one that ended up in the highest, if you recall on the previous slide, is the thing that got to market quicker because we had the focus, we knew exactly what we were going after, and we knew a lot about the insurance product, right? And so when we knew a lot about it and we had that focus, that's what ultimately got the feature out to market. So for me, it's less about being hard. It's more about taming that hunger, more about ensuring that that focus is in place and that you've actually got buy-in. And to that end, if we think about our user, and we think about it being just about the user, the first thing I'd call out is actually there's lots of different groups involved in bringing forward features, right? So I'm sure in all of your companies, you've got lots of different stakeholders involved in terms of bringing about features and thinking about features. But every single one of these features, so that downtown feature, it was driven by user research. Everything that we knew about downtown and our downtown users, again, was driven by user research. Same thing with compare, same thing with insurance. And you're going, okay, well then what's the difference? Like, how did they get out to the market in faster ways or not faster ways? And the thing that I'd urge you to think about is that it's not just about that user research. That user research absolutely focuses the problem in terms of solving a very real UI component, but getting to the answer had everything to do with a company-wide performance initiative, right? Which just meant that actually people were focused on this, people were bought into this, and they understood that we needed to solve this problem, which is ultimately going to get you to that answer. So if we think again about those 3 different component parts of bringing a feature together, you've got your time to focus, your time to break down that concept, and the time to develop, with the time to develop often being the shortest part of the problem, right? And breaking down the concept and that focus and that buy-in as being sort of the most important component parts of what it means to realize a feature, what it means to bring that into the market. And then ultimately your time to learning, right, being very, very different depending on how you actually understand that focus and how you understand the problem. So if you just focus on a user, or if you just use user research to try and advocate for solving a problem, what I'd say is like 100% you have to understand that user and you have to go after the person that's ultimately using your site, right, to solve the problem. But if you just focus on that, then you're going to be slower off the blocks because you need to understand the wider context of the problem. You need to understand what the different stakeholders are that are in the mix and how they're contributing to that problem to really kind of create that compelling product and feature. And the final thing, it's kind of one of my favorite things to talk about, is this sort of big bang activity. I love really beautiful products. I love things that are fun to interact with, and I really love moments in a product that are just like sleek and really, really nice to use, right? And I think we all do in some way. But we also sort of think about products in like, okay, well, I'm going to have to entirely change this layout. The whole flow is going to have to change because ultimately this doesn't work. And we have those kind of big, bold ideas about approaching our product. And what I'd urge you to think about is actually kind of solving those problems again in different ways. So if we bring it back down to this downtown example and the differences between that kind of map and list display, the users said it was all about location. So we kind of solved that, right? We have a map there, and we're saying, right, okay, well, we know it's about location, so we're gonna give you a map to be able to make that selection. But then we saw that that display converted at 50% less than this display, and you're going, well, why is that the case? If our users are saying this is what it's about, then why is that kind of happening? And we know that they're very different user experiences, right? So like they don't look the same at all. And so what did we decide to do? Well, what we said was, actually, what if we created a downtown list? What if we combine those two things together? So as you can see, maybe, there's a little map there that pops out into a modal that ultimately gives that user that location intel and changes that user experience ever so slightly. Like, it wasn't difficult to do, right? We had a map, we had a list. What if we pop a little tiny map in there and then pop that out into a modal that we already had built, really? And what we saw was a plus 38% increase in conversion. Like, that is massive for a business of our size. Like, just such a huge win when you think about that problem in a really, really simple way. And you don't go for the all singing, all dancing and thinking about every single component part of it. You actually test and try one version of that. So the next piece is on compare, and as I said, with filtering. And the biggest difference between these two things, can anybody tell me? Huh? Yeah, images, yeah, yep. So there's images in this one, and there's no images in this one, right? They've all got the same names. One's kind of a carousel, and one's a bit more of a list, so that is a difference as well. So we said, okay, right, well, what if we actually made it easier to compare? We understood that problem again, and we looked at those different user experiences, and what if we actually changed that to be images and little blocks similar to what we had on our desktop display, knowing that there was that big difference between them, right? So we knew that this one converted at 3.49%. This one converted at 4.56%, which is about a 30% increase, right? And you're just going, that was a really simple thing. Like, why didn't we do that before? And why didn't we cop to that? And why didn't we think about it in that way? But again, very simple change, not about being complicated, not about changing the whole filtering flow or how we thought about that compare. But this will drive that understanding even further, right? Because again, you got the product to market and you're learning from it, right? And then finally on insurance, as I said, users were saying, right, I don't understand the differences between these insurance offers. I don't understand basic and premium products. We saw that 10% drop in conversion. And then we knew that user experience was unclear. So people were able to call out the insurance product names. They were able to sort of talk about it, but they really didn't understand what it was. And so we decided to change one very simple thing. Anybody know what it is? Nope. So we changed it from basic to premium to limited to premium. We changed the words. We changed the names of these products. So people were calling out those words. They were calling out those things as things that they didn't understand. And what we saw was, again, an 11% increase. Now, to be fair, we experimented with lots of different wording changes here. So this was definitely, I think, the third test we did. But it was that notion that actually, when you change small things, they have impacts. And even when we changed one word, so we changed it to standard instead of premium, what we saw was a minus 6% drop. So you go, that's minus 6%, that's plus 11%. Like, those are huge swings. And all we did was we changed the words based off of that core insight that people don't understand what these products are, they don't understand what these products do. And one of my favorite things, as I said, about products is that kind of small moments, those iterative moments. So I've got up here on the right hand, or the left hand side for you guys, one of my favorite apps, Deliveroo. Anyone use it? Yeah? And one of the things I always do is I always give a tip. And why do I give a tip? Because it's a small moment of delight. When you click on that little plus sign, you get this little burst of excitement, and then you see your little smiley face, and it grows even bigger when you give bigger tips. And every single time I'm locked in, right? Like, I just enjoy pressing that button. And then you think, oh, well, I'm giving someone a tip. This is a nice thing to do. And I want to urge you to think about that, which is just going, like, don't underestimate these, like, really small things, right? These really small moments of delight. They're so important to what it means to kind of realize a product. So I do have a few examples from our own product. When users compare cars, they click on the little heart, and it pops up into the little compare display, so it enables them to compare a little bit better. And when we put that live, we saw a plus 18% increase. We also did something different on this display, which you probably can't even see because it's such a small, little nuanced way of actually accounting for things. So when users added, say, an additional driver to their car hire, or they added other things to their basket, what we did was we wiggled the little basket up into the top right-hand corner. And you go, well, that's such a small change. It doesn't actually mean anything, but it actually led to a plus 7% increase in our conversion once again. So, you know, it's not about these kind of big, bold changes. It is about the small moments and the small moments of delight that you actually bring and incorporate into that product to solve those problems. So if we think about this in new and different ways and debunking those myths, it's not hard. It's just a little bit more about focus and focusing on what you're actually trying to go after and really encapsulating that in a succinct and understood way. It's not just about the user. If you just focus on the user, you don't actually get the product out to market, and you're not actually learning from it because there's so many other component parts to thinking about that product. And don't go for the big bang all the time. Don't, you know, redesign the flow and think about everything in new and different ways every single time you approach a feature, right? Think about that nuance. Think about those small things and those small changes that actually really, really make a difference. Or just have fun. Easy way to remember that one, right? And you know, when you think about having fun, I said at the start of my talk that solving problems to me is fun. I think that's why a lot of us are here today, because we enjoy solving problems. And when you're solving problems, I urge you to think about these contexts in kind of different ways, and be this guy, right? Like, approach the way in which you engage in an environment and you actually modify your way of thinking about things and you debunk those myths in an atypical way. Like, don't go after the way that everybody's telling you to think about things. Actually think about problems in new and different ways. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. That was great.
Yeah.
All right, right before lunch, we have time for a few questions for Deborah. Anybody have some questions? Yeah, we have one right here. Great. Yeah, keep your hand up.
Hi. Yeah? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Those stats that you show, did you test in production or pre-prod?
We do both. So we do usability testing, prototyping testing before, depending on how different the feature is going to be and depending on usability that we've seen in the past that could be difficult. So like, say, a carousel interaction, we're not quite sure if that's going to work. But we do most of our testing actually in production, which is really around, you know, actually when you put it out into a live environment, what actually happens and what does that affect?
And what's the average sample? Like, how many users do you test for each?
So it depends, really. So sometimes we're testing different channels. So we're testing, say, different markets. So we look at, say, the US market versus maybe the Portuguese market or the Spanish market and that kind of thing. And obviously, when you test different sizes of populations, when you test different software features in those markets, what you find is that sometimes it can take longer to get to a testing result. So again, that's the sort of nuance of the A/B testing space, which is just going, it has to do with two things. One is the size of the test, and the size of that, you know, either side of the traffic, and the other piece is around actually how big of an uplift do you get And if it's small, then it takes a really long time. If it's a large uplift, like a plus 11%, then it'll take no time at all. So yeah, it really depends on the test. It depends on the feature.
Cool. Thank you.
Cool, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, great questions. Okay, any other questions? Yep, one over here, great.
Hi, my name is Nicholas. My question is, how do you cycle through these different changes? Because if you do a lot of things at the same time, you probably won't get an exact measurement of what impact of this change. So how do you go about choosing your tests and cycling through them?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's a couple things. One is that we test lots of different things, and so sometimes what we choose to do is we'll test different component parts of the feature at different times. So for example, on the wording test, all we tested was the wording. For example, on the downtown list display, you can see that we did obviously change a number of different elements, even though they were really small kind of changes. And sometimes what we do is actually we split out some of the changes across lots of different branches of the funnel, and we go about testing those different things. And what we use is something called a multi-arm bandit approach, whereby we actually go after calculating which arm of the test is winning, and we calculate the probability that that's going to win, and then we funnel more and more traffic into those arms of the test when we see that one's winning over another based off of the probability. So it means we get to test results a lot faster.
Very cool, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Great, I think we have time for one more question before lunch. Anybody have a final question? Okay, great. Well, thanks, Deborah. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.